The house stood at the end of a long, forgotten road, its Victorian frame looming against the darkening sky. I thought it was perfect, a place to start over, to leave behind the memories that had suffocated me since my husband's sudden death. Eliza, everyone called me, Eliza the widow. I didn't want to hear that word anymore, so I had fled the city, and now I stood before this old house, desperate for peace. The first few days were calm, almost unsettlingly so. The house groaned with age, its floorboards creaking under my feet, but it was quiet, too quiet. There was a heaviness in the air, like something weighted just beyond the edges of my perception, watching, waiting. It started with the whispers. At first I thought it was just my imagination, my grief playing tricks on me. Late at night, when the wind howled through the narrow corridors, I would hear it. Soft, indistinct murmurs. They seemed to come from the attic, but every time I built up the courage to check, I found nothing but dust and shadows. But then the whispers grew louder. Eliza! That voice, God, that voice was familiar. My heart would pound every time I heard it, as if the dead had returned, calling out to me. It sounded like him, like the man I had loved, but I couldn't believe it. I wouldn't, and yet the voice wouldn't stop. One night I stood at the base of the attic stairs listening to that sickly sweet whisper beckon me. I could feel the cold draft seeping through the cracks in the floor, but I felt more than just cold. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. The voice, now clearer than ever, sounded so much like him, my husband. My heart ached, my mind raced, and my body trembled with indecision. Come to me, Eliza. I nearly dropped the candle I was holding. My breath hitched in my throat, and I took a step back, stumbling into the wall. It couldn't be real. He was gone. I buried him. I saw him buried. But grief has a strange way of twisting reality. The next day, I found an old book tucked away in a drawer in the study, its pages yellowed and brittle. It was a guide to séances, summoning the dead, contacting lost souls. My rational mind screamed at me to toss it away, but the whispering had become unbearable. It had to be him. It had to be. I didn't even wait for Halloween night. I gathered the candles, followed the instructions in the book, and prepared myself for the séance. The attic, the voice had always come from the attic. That's where I set the table, drawing the circle as the book instructed. As I lit the last candle, the air grew heavy, so thick I could barely breathe. The whispers stopped, and for a moment the silence was deafening. My hands shook as I closed my eyes and whispered his name into the void, begging for a sign. Nothing. I opened my eyes, feeling foolish, the flickering candles casting long shadows on the attic walls. Then suddenly the temperature plummeted. The flames sputtered, nearly going out. I heard it again. His voice, clearer than ever before, echoed around me. Eliza, I'm here. My breath caught in my throat. The shadows on the walls seemed to move, twisting and writhing in the dim light. The voice was closer now, so close I could almost feel his breath on my skin. I missed you, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. Suddenly, the door to the attic slammed shut behind me. The room was plunged into an unnatural darkness, and the candle flames extinguished all at once, leaving me in total blackness. My heart raced and I fumbled for the matches, but before I could light another candle, I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps approaching me from behind. I turned, expecting to see him, expecting to see something. But there was nothing there, just the dark. Eliza, the voice rasped, but it wasn't soft and sweet anymore. It was guttural, distorted, a mockery of the voice I once loved. Panic surged through me, and I felt something cold wrap around my wrist, an invisible hand, tight and unyielding. I yanked my arm away, stumbling backward, only to trip over something on the floor. My hands grazed the dusty floorboards, and in the pitch-black room I felt something slick beneath my fingers. I brought my hand up to my face, barely able to see in the faint light from the crack beneath the attic door. It was dark, too dark, and warm. Blood. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The voice was no longer calling my name. Now it was laughing, a low, cruel sound that reverberated through the room. And then from the darkness, a face emerged. Not his. Something else entirely. It stared at me with hollow eyes, its twisted smile growing wider as it leaned closer. "You summoned me, Eliza!" I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the laughter, echoing endlessly in the darkness. I bolted toward the door, desperate to escape, but it wouldn't budge. Something was holding it closed from the other side. And then the voice came again, whispering in my ear, sending shivers down my spine. "You're mine now." The days that followed felt like I was trapped in a waking nightmare. I couldn't shake the feeling of something lurking just behind me, breathing down my neck whenever I turned away. The attic became off-limits. I bolted the door shut, but even then, I could hear the faint scratching from the other side, like something or someone was trying to get out. The voice was no longer confined to the attic. I heard it everywhere now, in the kitchen as I washed dishes, behind me when I lay in bed at night, even when I ventured outside into the garden. It followed me, whispering my name, taunting me with memories of my husband. Only this thing, it wasn't him. The worst part was the dreams. Each night, I found myself back in the attic, standing in that same circle of candles. In the dream, I would hear him call my name, and like before, I would turn, expecting to see my husband. But instead, there was a figure standing in the shadows, half hidden. It was always just beyond the candlelight, too far for me to make out any features, until it smiled. That smile. Too wide, too sharp, too wrong. It beckoned me forward, whispering promises that chilled my blood. "I can bring him back, Eliza. He doesn't have to be gone forever." The voice was seductive, almost convincing. But I knew better now. Whatever was speaking to me wasn't my husband. It was something else, something that wanted me to believe, to give in. I woke up in a cold sweat every time, the sheets tangled around me, heart racing as if I had run miles. Each morning I told myself I wouldn't go back to the attic. I wouldn't listen to the voice, but it was getting stronger. And so was my doubt. By the time Halloween arrived, I was barely sleeping, barely eating. The house felt like it was alive, breathing with me, watching my every move. The whispers were louder now, more insistent. The scratching behind the attic door had grown more frantic, like something was desperate to be free. That night, I sat in the living room, staring at the fire, my mind a fog of exhaustion and fear. I tried to ignore the voice that had started up again, a steady whisper from somewhere above me. It was clearer than ever, calling my name with a sickening sweetness. "Come to me, Eliza. He's waiting for you." My heart skipped a beat, and for a moment I almost believed it. What if it really was him? What if my husband was trapped in this house, waiting for me to set him free? What if I had made a mistake all along, letting grief and fear blind me to the truth? Before I knew what I was doing, I was standing in front of the attic door, my hand trembling on the knob. The scratching had stopped. There was only silence, thick and oppressive, like the house itself was holding its breath. I hesitated, my fingers tightening around the cold metal. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to run as far from this cursed house as I could. But something deeper, something darker, urged me to open the door. I did. The door swung open with a groan, revealing the pitch-black void of the attic. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped inside, the air thick with the smell of decay. I reached for the matches in my pocket, striking one to light the way, but before I could even raise it, the flame flickered and died. Something moved in the dark. I froze, straining to see through the shadows. There was a sound, a low, guttural breathing, close enough that I could feel the vibrations in my bones. And then, just as quickly, the attic was silent again. For a moment, I thought I had imagined it. Maybe it was just the house settling, or the wind outside. I took a deep breath and turned to leave, but the door was no longer there. Panic surged through me. I fumbled for the matches, striking another one, desperate for any light. This time, the match stayed lit long enough for me to see what was standing in the corner of the room. A figure, hunched and twisted, its body draped in tattered black fabric, stared at me from the shadows. Its face was obscured, but I could see its hands, long, bony fingers reaching out toward me, the nails sharp and jagged like claws. I stumbled back, my foot catching on something solid. I hit the floor hard, the match slipping from my fingers and snuffing out in the dirt. The figure in the corner shifted, moving closer, its breathing heavy and rasping. "Eliza!" it whispered, that sickly sweet voice dripping with malice. "You came back to me." It was closer now, so close I could feel the cold emanating from its body. My heart thundered in my chest, my mind screaming at me to move, but my body wouldn't respond. I could only watch in terror as the thing stepped into the faint light, revealing its face, or what was left of it. It wasn't human. The skin was stretched too tight over its skull, the eyes sunken and milky white. Its lips peeled back into a twisted grin, revealing rows of broken, jagged teeth. It was a grotesque parody of the man I once knew, my husband's features distorted beyond recognition. "Stay with me, Eliza," it crooned, reaching out with those skeletal fingers. "You don't have to be alone anymore." I scrambled to my feet, the adrenaline kicking in, and bolted for the door. My hands shook as I pounded against the wood, but it wouldn't open. It was sealed shut, trapping me in that cursed attic with whatever had taken my husband's voice, his face, and twisted them into something monstrous. Behind me, I heard the thing's breath growing heavier, closer. I turned just in time to see its hand reaching for my shoulder. And then the whisper came again, low and haunting. "You summoned me, Eliza. Now you belong to me." The lights flickered once, and the room plunged into darkness. When I woke, I was no longer in the attic. I was lying on the cold wooden floor of the living room, the fire long dead in the hearth. My body ached as if I had been dropped from a great height, and a sharp pain throbbed at the back of my skull. For a moment, I thought it had all been a nightmare. But then I saw the blood. A trail of it led from the attic door, dark and glistening, snaking its way down the stairs and across the floorboards to where I lay. My heart pounded in my chest as I scrambled to my feet, backing away from the crimson path. It wasn't my blood. At least I didn't think it was. But the sight of it sent a wave of nausea through me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me down from the attic. The silence in the house was deafening. Even the wind outside had stilled, leaving only the sound of my ragged breathing and the frantic pounding of my heart. I stared at the blood trail, my mind racing with questions I didn't want to answer. Had it been real? The figure in the attic? The twisted, grotesque face that looked so much like my husband? The rational part of me wanted to believe that I had fainted, that my mind had conjured up some horrible vision in a fit of grief and fear. But deep down, I knew better. I had heard its voice, felt its breath on my skin. That thing, it was real and it was still here. I had to leave. I had to get out of this house. I stumbled toward the front door, my legs shaking beneath me, my hands still trembling from the encounter. But as soon as I reached for the door handle, a sharp pain shot through my wrist. I cried out, clutching it in agony, and saw it, the mark. Blackened and burned into my skin, an intricate symbol wound its way around my wrist like a bracelet of ash. I stared at it in horror, the skin blistered and raw, as if I had been branded. The more I looked at it, the more it seemed to pulse, glowing faintly in the dim light. I tried to ignore it, tried to block out the pain. But no matter how hard I pulled at the door, it wouldn't open. It was as if the house itself had locked me inside, sealing me in with whatever cursed spirit I had summoned. The whispers started again. "Eliza!" The voice was coming from behind me, low and mocking. "You can't leave now. You belong to me." I spun around, searching for the source, but the house was empty. At least it appeared that way. My eyes darted from corner to corner, my mind playing tricks on me as shadows shifted in the dim light. Every breath I took felt heavy, like the air itself had grown thick with something unnatural. The mark on my wrist burned with a new intensity, and as the pain deepened, I felt a pull, a physical pull, dragging me back toward the stairs. It was as though an invisible force had tethered itself to me, pulling me inexorably back to the attic. I fought against it, digging my heels into the floor, but it was no use. My body wasn't my own anymore. I was being dragged toward the stairs step by agonizing step, my feet moving against my will. The closer I got to the attic, the stronger the force became. Terror gripped me as I realized what was happening. Whatever I had summoned, it was taking control. And it wanted me back in that attic. I screamed, clawing at the walls, trying to stop myself from being pulled further. My nails scraped against the wallpaper, leaving jagged marks in my wake, but nothing slowed my movement. My muscles strained against the invisible force, but I could feel it tightening around me like a noose. As I reached the top of the stairs, the attic door creaked open on its own, revealing the darkness within. The smell of decay hit me like a wave, and my stomach churned. The air inside the attic was cold, so cold that my breath came out in thick, visible puffs. But it wasn't just the temperature that made my blood run cold. It was what I saw inside. The room was no longer empty. In the center of the attic, where the circle of candles had once stood, there was now a large wooden chair, old and rotting, as if it had been there for centuries. And sitting in the chair was him, or rather, what was left of him. My husband's body was slumped forward, his head lolling to one side. His skin was pale and waxy, like a corpse that had been left to rot. His eyes were open, but they were empty, hollow sockets staring vacantly into nothing. And his mouth was twisted into that same grotesque grin I had seen before. I screamed, backing away, but the door slammed shut behind me, trapping me inside. "Eliza?" The voice came again, but this time it was different. Stronger, darker, dripping with malice. "You wanted him back, and now he's here." I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. This wasn't my husband. It couldn't be. My husband was dead. He had been gone for months. But as I stared at the thing in the chair, I realized with sickening clarity that I had brought this upon myself. I had summoned something, and now it was using my husband's body as a puppet, a sick joke to torment me. The thing in the chair began to move, its joints cracking and popping as it stood up. Its head jerked unnaturally, and it turned to face me with that same horrifying smile. "Don't you recognize me, Eliza?" it rasped, its voice a mockery of the man I had loved. "I'm home." I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest, but there was nowhere to go. The attic was small, and the thing was blocking the only exit. As it stepped closer, I noticed something in its hand, something small and metallic. A locket. My locket, the one I had buried with him. It dangled from his skeletal fingers, swaying back and forth like a pendulum. "You can join me, Eliza," it whispered, taking another step forward. "We can be together again." I shook my head, my voice hoarse with terror. No, you're not him. You're not." Before I could finish, the attic floor beneath me gave a sudden lurch, as if the house itself was alive and reacting to my panic. I stumbled, falling to my knees, and the locket slipped from the creature's grasp, hitting the floor with a soft asterisk, clink asterisk. In that moment, something shifted. The whispers stopped. The air in the attic grew impossibly still, and the figure before me froze mid-step, its head cocked to one side as if listening. Then, with a sickening crack, its body collapsed into a heap, the bones splintering and crumbling like dried wood. I stared, wide-eyed, my heart hammering in my chest. Whatever force had been controlling it had vanished. But as I scrambled to my feet, gasping for breath, I knew this wasn't over. I wasn't alone. From the shadows, something else began to stir. The shadows moved, slithering and curling along the edges of the attic, growing darker with every second. My pulse quickened, my breath coming in short gasps as I watched, frozen in place, the thing in the dark slowly taking shape. I braced myself for whatever horror was about to emerge. But then something strange happened, something I hadn't expected. The air, which had been thick and suffocating, began to lighten. The cold chill that had gripped the attic for so long faded, replaced by a warmth that felt almost familiar. From within the shadows, a soft light began to glow, faint at first, but growing brighter. It illuminated the room, pushing back the darkness, and in the middle of that light, I saw him, my husband. But this time, it wasn't the grotesque imitation I had seen before. This was really him, his face, his kind eyes, his soft smile. My breath caught in my throat. I had spent so many nights dreaming of this moment, hoping against hope that somehow I would see him again. But now that he was here, I couldn't move, couldn't speak. "Eliza," he said, his voice gentle and real. The voice I remembered. "I'm sorry." Tears welled up in my eyes as I took a step forward, my hand reaching out to him. "Is it really you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. He nodded, stepping closer to me, the warmth of his presence washing over me like sunlight after a storm. "It's me," he said, his voice filled with sorrow. "But I'm not here to stay." I froze, the joy in my heart turning to ice. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I thought I was trapped here," he said softly. "When I died, something dark latched onto me, used me to reach you. I never wanted this for you, Eliza. You've been carrying this curse ever since you moved into this house." My mind raced, trying to process his words. The séances, the whispers, the figure in the attic, it had all been part of some twisted game, orchestrated by a malevolent force that had latched onto my grief. He continued, his eyes filled with regret. "The spirit that's been haunting you, it fed on your pain. It used my voice, my face to lure you into performing that séance, but you're stronger than it realized." I swallowed hard, feeling a lump in my throat. I don't know how to stop it." His smile was sad but reassuring. "You already have. When you refused to give in to the darkness, when you fought back, you broke its hold. It's been using me as a puppet, but now that you see the truth, it can't control you anymore." The shadows in the attic began to fade, the room growing brighter with each passing second. The oppressive weight that had clung to me for so long lifted, like a fog finally clearing. "I don't want to lose you again," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I can't." He stepped forward, his hand gently touching mine. His skin was warm, solid, real. "You haven't lost me," he said softly. "I'll always be with you, Eliza, but you need to let go of the past. You need to live." His words hit me with a bittersweet clarity. For months I had been trapped in my grief, unable to move forward, unable to let go of the man I loved. But now I realized that holding on to him in this way, through pain, through sorrow, had only kept me bound to something far darker. I nodded, choking back a sob. "I'll try." He smiled, that familiar, loving smile that had always made me feel safe. "That's all I want," he whispered. "For you to be happy." The light around him grew brighter, and for a moment I felt a warmth so intense it was as if the sun itself had filled the room. I closed my eyes, basking in the feeling, and when I opened them again, he was gone. The attic was empty. The shadows, the darkness, the whispers, all of it had vanished. The house felt different, lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from its very foundations. The curse had been broken. I took a deep breath, my heart still heavy with loss, but for the first time in months, I didn't feel alone. The warmth lingered, a soft reminder that he was still with me, even if I couldn't see him. As I descended the stairs, leaving the attic behind for good, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. The air was crisp and fresh, the sunlight filtering through the windows, bathing the house in a golden glow. I knew I still had a long road ahead, but I also knew that I had faced the darkest part of my past and come out the other side. The house was no longer a prison, it was just a house, a place where I could heal, where I could begin again. I stepped outside, the cool breeze brushing against my face, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I smiled. I was free. The end.